So, ich begrüße Sie alle, hoffentlich.
Right, I'd like to welcome all of you. I hope you're well refreshed. Let's start the second session of today's meeting, our Franco-German Energy Forum Europe post-COVID-19, political and economic agendas for the energy transition and climate change mitigation. This afternoon we're going to focus more on the economic issues. We're going to talk about potentials and levers at this point in practice. And before the break, I promised you a few men as speakers, and here we have one. Yves Marignac, who is spokesperson for Association Négawatt, which is an important French think tank, and Mr. Marignac has been working in energy and nuclear power for about 20 years, and he coordinated the energy scenario for France and when they were quite busy in the French ministry. So I can see you now, Mr. Marignac. We'll hear you in a moment. You're going to be talking to us about small steps, big steps, and pragmatism as a catalyst for climate protection or for the energy transition. Just a little point. I think there are about 650 people listening. We're going to start by hearing Mr. Marignac, and then immediately after that, Georg Friedrichs from Vattenfall, and questions will follow that. Right? So one man, then another man, and then questions. Let's begin with Monsieur Marignac, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone. I'm delighted to be able to contribute to this conference. But like many of you, I'm sure I would have preferred to be in Berlin with you. But I'm going to, yes, talk to you about lessons learned from the work that our association Négawatt has drawn and our pragmatism from the scenarios. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just a few words first about the association itself, which has been in existence for about 20 years. We bring together experts, practitioners from the energy sector, and there are about 25 people are the hard nucleus, if you like, working on generating those scenarios that the association publishes. We've so far produced 4 of them. The last was in 2017 for France. We're currently working on a European scenario. But on the basis of these scenarios, we come up with policies, measures to put for public debate. And in France, increasingly, we're trying to put this to Europe as well. So next slide, please. Okay, a few words before we get into media res. The approach that my association Négawatt has been developing, we like to be very pragmatic, but we're also trying to address, or something that's the heart of our reflection, systemic ideas about the energy transition. Systemic because energy, or the way we relate our resources and different services, is of course part of a system, and that system will structure our society, our economy, our way of life. But it's also systemic because these days our system isn't sustainable. We have this climatic turbulence, we have technological risks, and so forth. So the approach we develop is about, if you like, trying to redistribute energy services and looking at the conditions in which we apply our various mechanisms and apparatus, going right through the chain from primary resource to the energy service. Then we look at all these systems together, and we deal with this at 3 levels. We're looking at 3 levels of intelligence. We're talking about a thrifty use of energy. How can we make smarter use of the energy we have? So first of all, it's about designing, then it's about delivering the energy, which is more about efficiencies, and then we're looking at tapping all the available resources, pooling them so that we can see how we can best improve this efficiency, and this substitution? Can we replace the energy we have in our stocks now? Can we shift towards more renewables? Let's look at the next slide. The work that our association Negawatt is doing is about forecasting to a great extent. We're talking about sufficiency and efficiency, and we're talking about replacing other energies with renewable energies up to 100%. Here you can see the overall balance sheet, if you like, for the scenario. We're doing a lot of work on sufficiency and efficiency, on getting to grips with the energy we have so that we can reduce consumption more than 60%, achieve an appropriate share of renewables, which I think means multiplying them by 3.5 at the moment, so that in future we can ensure that the French energy system is 100% supplied by renewable energies. There are some other issues as well. For example, carbon neutrality. So we're looking at a roadmap towards achieving carbon neutrality so that France can meet its pledge in the Paris Agreement. But also other benefits, environmental benefits, for example, halving our need for raw materials, reducing pollution. And we're also identifying through our scenarios other socio-economic benefits of major importance, including social justice, less precariousness in employment, trying to create jobs. We're hoping to have another 600,000 jobs created under this scenario compared with the business as usual one. So here we illustrate the kind of profound transformations we're going to need in order to achieve these major objectives, such as carbon neutrality and 100% renewable energies. Looking at time passing, obviously, the more time goes by without doing anything, the harder and the more urgent it all becomes. So we're looking at small steps we can start with, commitments to undertake bigger challenges in the future, but we need to start with the small steps. Nicolas Hulot, for our government, explained that we have to be realistic and take small steps. But we said that this is urgent and small steps okay, but we need to run. So we need to do more than small steps. We need to be pragmatic, but above all, we need to be efficient, we need to be coherent and consistent. We need to have a robust roadmap. We have to be able to adapt to different circumstances. And of course, we need to start gently because there's a certain inertia out there, but we need to move quickly towards a faster pace. Let's move on to the next slide. If we follow this pragmatic logic with consistency, acceleration, efficiency, and robustness, and so forth, it seems to us that sufficiency is primary, because this offers us tremendous potential for maximizing the impact of what we do and speeding up our energy transition. This sufficiency can be implemented at different levels in different sectors, and sometimes it's quite easy, and it's certainly if consumers make a little bit of effort. So where do we start? This efficiency is a lever in terms of services. For example, making equipment last longer, switching things off, not using things when you don't need them, reducing the inbuilt obsolescence of things, but also some more complex issues for consumers. In dealing with this inbuilt obsolescence,
On va jouer sur un deuxième niveau un peu plus complexe.
There's a second level which is a bit more complex, which is about the dimensional. For example, do we need the fridge to be as big as it is? There are two key sectors there, bearing in mind the impact they have on the consumption of energy and greenhouse gas emissions. That's buildings and vehicles. With buildings, the big question is going to be adjusting surface area per inhabitant, making the averages rather more reasonable, not increasing this where not necessary. Today we have a system where very often we use the same vehicle of the same size, whether we're transporting lots of people on a motorway or not, just moving around town. And the idea would be to move towards a solution where we would have access to different vehicles and are much more adaptable to different uses, depending where we need to go and what with. The third level, which is even more complex, where we need sufficiency and collective effort, applies to planning and sharing. So here we're talking about car sharing, co-working, perhaps sharing equipment in a shared environment, but also in terms of town and country planning. This is important if we can reduce distances that people have to travel to access particular commodities, or to get to work, or to go shopping, or take their leisure. If we can reduce these distances by mixing functions more in residential quarters or urban districts, that helps to reduce distance. So we're looking at sufficiency with regard to other things too. For example, reducing packaging and not wasting food. These are other ways of reducing consumption and therefore greenhouse gases, for example. Next slide, please. Having illustrated a few of these options for sufficiency, I'd like to focus on 2 points. The first is that this sufficiency, which seems fairly easy to identify and very often quite easy to implement, is a key lever for speeding up the process and making the transition more efficient, again, at 3 levels. Partly because we're reducing needs for resources and speeding up the pace and depth of substitution with energy resources, but also because if we look beyond our climate and energy targets, there are many other benefits we can often identify. For example, if we're talking about consuming raw materials, we can also use land more effectively and also water. And by reducing atmospheric pollution, we can have a positive impact on health. The same applies to soft e-mobility. The third important point, because we're talking here at the moment above all about COVID and resilience, sufficiency also helps to make a system more resilient, an economy, for example, because it's going to upfront, at source, reduce the frequency and scope of shocks, but it's also going to play a role. If we look at the chains of consequences, by reducing people's vulnerability, the system's vulnerability to such shocks. So that globally, all round, sufficiency has a positive impact on a number of different objectives affected by the energy transition. Next slide. I'm going to finish with this point, which is the impact of sufficiency, or the link, if you like, between sufficiency and socio-economic change. One reason why sufficiency is often neglected or considered to be the fifth wheel on the cart in the energy transition is that we have this negative association that it will bring down growth, economic growth, and therefore social growth. But quite the reverse. We need these days to move away from this idea that growth has to imply economic degradation, because if we can improve serviceability, that doesn't have to be the case. So sufficiency is a lever today to stimulate the transition and tip our economy forward. From a social point of view, this sufficiency approach is absolutely indispensable. Sufficiency, if it's properly understood, means that services are offered to people, if you like, along a corridor which respects the limits that this planet is capable of providing, enabling us to satisfy our individual needs with this awareness. And there's also the idea that we can converge quality of life. And that's an important objective for the European Union, because we want to reduce or cut out energy poverty and enhance social justice in this way by offering an alternative through this service structure. For example, I talked about adaptability of available vehicles before. I'd like to talk about two lessons that we've recently drawn in France with our civic forums, for example, to show that when policies like eco-tax aren't accompanied by a public discussion about the quality of service and people's needs, focused on this idea of sufficiency, then one can quickly generate a crisis. And if we can reflect and adopt a systematic approach to meeting citizens' needs and reflecting citizens' concerned, we can do that within a logical framework which leads to less consumption and greater, and then social acceptability will be greater. People will be more prepared to accept the changes. And that is an essential lever for the energy transition. Thank you.
Und wir danken Ihnen, Monsieur Marignac, und schalten jetzt ganz schnell zu Georg Friedrichs. Er ist Programmmanager.
Thank you. Now we'll very quickly move on to our next speaker, Georg Friedrichs, who is a program manager for the coal phase-out at Vattenfall. So we're moving from a pragmatic person to a practitioner. I think he's there. And he's going to talk to us about carbon-free heat supply for Berlin. We're talking about heating systems. There are challenges, and no doubt there are hurdles too, that also have to be taken on board. Mr. Friedrichs, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you. I hope you can see me, because my screen is still black. However, I would like to provide you with insights today concerning a very exciting and concrete project concerning the energy transition. It takes place in Berlin, and we are not talking about a small project. In my company, it is among the biggest and most exciting projects that we are seeing when it comes to translating our goals into action. I hope you can see my first slide. I would now like to talk about it. Vattenfall Berlin Heat is the backbone of heat supply in Berlin, and this has always been the case. We have many assets, also some weaknesses. We are a traditional company. I would like to focus on the figure 1.3 million, which you can see in the left bottom corner. We supply 1.3 million housing units in Berlin. Of course, not all of this not all these units stand for a single household, but a big part of heat supply in Berlin is provided by this central system. And that is why it involves vast parts of the challenges that Berlin is seeing when it comes to carbon emission reductions or when it comes to even reaching the goal of carbon neutrality. Next slide, please. What you can see here is that concerning the goals we are talking about, there are not many differences between Berlin politics and my company. Fossil-free within one generation. This has been the goal of our company for a couple of years now, and we are very consistent when it comes to implement this in the context of our heat activities. Berlin is probably the biggest challenge here. At the bottom, you can see that we still use coal for generating heat in Berlin. And this is different from the Netherlands or Sweden. We will be more successful in phasing out of coal more quickly in the Netherlands and in Sweden than in Germany, because Sweden has a strong priority on electricity anyway. But one thing is clear. Vattenfall pursues the goal of a fossil-free heat supply, and this is also the goal of Berlin. Next slide, please. You can see here that we share the same goal. Berlin has to engage in immense efforts. From around 30 megatons of carbon per year, we have to move to an amount that is considerably lower in order to reach our goals. Next slide. We are making a joint effort here. Joint feasibility study 2018 to 2019. On the basis of the climate goals of the city of Berlin, we have launched a joint feasibility study together with the city, but also involving NGOs, politicians, and the administration of Berlin. We asked ourselves the question, how can we be successful in phasing out of black coal by 2030 in Berlin, without at the same time generating new problems? And I'm talking about social issues here. The costs of district heating are reflected in housing prices, and affordable housing is a very topical question indeed in Berlin. To be honest, it has taken us quite some time to do this thoroughly. However, we have come up with a joint feasibility study which is already being implemented. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at the figures. Roadmap for Vattenfall's Heat Berlin. What you can see here is the scope of heat, and particularly of district heating. They need to contribute to our goal, because we are talking about 1/3 of carbon emissions produced in Berlin. And this is the fact for historical reasons. We've always had a strong focus on coal, and this is quite a burden. This can be explained by the fact that Berlin used to be a kind of island within the boundaries of the Berlin Wall. Coal could be stored quite easily, and it stood for sufficiency. But today, this means that our portfolio today is a problem when it comes to climate protection. However, we are also pursuing a clear goal here. We want to decrease our emissions by 2030. We need to be well below 4 million tons here, and by 2040 we will need to achieve even more. How do we want to do this?
Technology options are not unlimited.
Technology options are not unlimited. This is my next slide. We have very much looked into what can be used in order to generate and use heat, while at the same time decreasing the carbon footprint of this heat. And there are some traditional solutions to achieve that. Waste incineration, first and foremost. Waste has to be burned in Germany, and this generates a lot of heat, and Berlin already uses this. We can become more efficient here. We will make technological changes in concert with Berlin's subsidiary in the area of incineration, and this company belongs to the city. However, we are already doing this. We need to engage in third-party integration. We need to use waste heat. However, there are several problems here because waste heat is not always produced near the networks or the grids. The connection is not stable. The interpreter is not understanding everything. Sometimes we don't need heat during summer because there might be enough heat generated by incineration. Berlin also faces a third problem. Berlin is not a traditionally industrial city. We only have a limited amount of industrial waste heat. It is easier in other cities here. They have more potential here. For example, when looking at Hamburg. What is exciting, though, is heat and sewage water or wastewater. Wastewater always has a certain average temperature, and that makes it possible to use heat pumps all year long. So this comes in handy, and we will engage in this. However, potential is not unlimited here either, and some things just don't work in Berlin. For example, solar thermal energy. It is possible at a technological level, but we don't have enough space in Berlin. You need quite some space for this. And in the future, this space might also be needed for PV, photovoltaics. Because photovoltaics might generate more energy at lower costs. And the interpreter doesn't hear anything anymore. I can't interpret because I don't hear the speaker anymore. Mr. Friedrichs, we can't hear you anymore. For a minute, we couldn't hear you anymore, but now I can hear you again, and we can see all of your slides. But the sound is a bit shaky. Would you like to say something again so I can check whether the sound is all right? Okay, it is not all right. So let's wait for a second for the sound. You are not that far away from the Federal Foreign Office, but however, we can't hear you. So maybe I might go back to Mr. Marignac to Paris. Are you hearing me? I can't hear you. Your mic is not switched on.
Yes, I've put my mic back on and I can hear you. Then perhaps I could just briefly take some of the questions a bit quicker. We've heard quite a lot from the practical sphere, from Mr. Friedrichs, what Vattenfall is doing, the objectives and to some extent the hurdles. Perhaps I can ask our pragmatist, Mr. Marignac, What are the factors for you that are pivotal to achieving our climate objectives? Can you tell us briefly what they are?
C'est une question évidemment très
That
difficile.
is a very difficult question.
La première chose, évidemment,
The first thing, of course,
de partager
is to share
conscience
an awareness of the need to take action.
parce que malheureusement,
We have to remind ourselves of that because, unfortunately,
en tout cas,
it hasn't reached everybody. There are some people still opposing the idea that we need a transition to achieve climate neutrality.
c'est d'avoir cette
So the first point would be to have that shared vision. The second
trouver les modes de gouvernance,
is to find
engager tous les
modes of governance to involve all the stakeholders in the same agenda.
cadres, que les États
The European Union needs to provide a framework so that member states play the role of providing coherence in their own country.
on est une très bonne illustration. Il faut
But this was it's a very good illustration. At local level,
mobiliser ceux qui
all the stakeholders need to get together in concerted action to undertake this transition. The potential for the energy transition and achieving carbon neutrality is local. We have to change buildings, we have to change mobility, we have to use resources of renewable energy at local level, just as we've just heard.
enjeux, c'est d'abord
So that's what we need to do. We need to align all the stakeholders, first of all, around the idea that we have to take this action, and then we need to set up the regulations, the governance, above all at the local level, to make sure we come up with optimum solutions.
Ja, vielen Dank, Marignac. Ich gucke jetzt mal noch mal zu Herrn Friedrichs, ob die Tonprobleme.
Okay, I'm looking at Mr. Friedrichs again to see whether his problems have resolved themselves. Yes, he can hear us. Okay.
Sie können jetzt einfach mit dem
So please continue with the rest of your slides. I don't know whether you are aware of the fact that we could see them very well. So let's continue, and after that we'll have an answer and questions and answer session.
Wir machen es vielleicht einfach schnell. Also wir haben
I will try to keep it short.
wir testen viel.
Next slide, please. We are trying out many things in Berlin.
Das was kaum schon oben.
We are trying to prepare for the future.
Dann kann man schon sehen, dass wir im Jahr 2030 noch
By 2030,
aus Gas
a considerable amount of heat will still have to be generated by gas. This
im Jahre 2030.
is not due to the fact that we want this, but we don't see other possibilities. We find ourselves in a technical no man's land. We have to use something else than coal. We can't wait, but we don't have enough renewable energies
Die uns helfen, das schneller zu machen.
that help us to accelerate more. There's not enough renewable electricity, and this is key for everything that we want to engage in the future. We want to use it, and it has to be affordable to use it for the heat sector.
Transformation Timeline, da haben wir mal unsere großen Projekte
You can see our transformation timeline here.
vielleicht im Kopf behalten muss, ist, dass ein solcher
And what you should remember is that such a transformation process takes years when it comes to big industrial facilities. We are talking about a coal phase out now, but we will only have completed this by 2029. Until then, coal will be used in Berlin, not because we don't want to be quicker, because of planning, auction procedures, and because we will need time for construction. Let's turn to my last slide now.
bei Targets ist es überschrieben.
Clear targets.
Stellt sich die Frage, was passiert dann? Also wir
Um, this begs the question concerning the future. First phase, lignite phase out. This lies behind us. Second phase, hard coal phase out. We are in the middle of that. And we will achieve a considerable carbon emission reduction.
Kraft-Wärme-Kopplungs-Gasanlagen,
But
gleich auch das
We know that modern gas CHP plants also involve problems because at a given point we will also need to phase out fossil gas. We need to find good solutions here. Of course, we won't be successful in everything because there are many problems. However, we have enough hydrogen, and from the point of view of storage, this is a good thing. So concerning the plants we are building today, we will be able to use hydrogen too. And secondly, enough renewable electricity in the system, because this means that we can use this for heat. We are preparing for this right now by constructing heat storages. We have just commissioned the biggest in Europe with 120 megawatts. This is quite impressive. With storage and power to heat, you can achieve efficient heat supply. But at the heart and center is enough electricity. The power lines that we are seeing today are not enough in order to bring the heat that we need to the city. So on the part of power lines, we also need to improve. I would also like to say something about gas and hydrogen. With them, we can use existing infrastructures that already exist in the city. We don't have to newly construct them, plan them, push them through. No, they exist and we can make use of them. So we believe that we will see a combination of all that. What the situation will look like between 2035 and 40 is difficult to say. Let me pick up on something my predecessor said. We are seeing difficulties in using electricity for heat because of the levels of balancing. So how do we deal with electricity in connection to heat and hydrogen in connection with heat? Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Mr. Friedrichs. The presentations will be published 1 week after the conference on the website of the Franco-German Energy Forum, so you will be able to look at these slides again. Let me now turn to some questions. I would like to ask one question to both of you, and maybe Mr. Marignac, you would like to answer first. How can heat networks be promoted while at the same time creating incentives, because this decreases the market for district heating?
Networks in general terms, again, the Berlin example illustrates this well, are the major strategic assets in the energy transition. So using our existing networks and properly evolving those networks is a structural factor which will define the success of the transition. So wherever we exist them, we need to use them for heating, but we also have to develop and upgrade, create them. Using gas networks, of course the gas has to become renewable gas, and using the power grids, we would need to demonstrate how much the power supply needs to play a role here. So you need a strategic vision. Once you have a strategic vision, you'll find an important role for power, and you'll need to get hold of all the power you can. Then you need to store it, of course, using hydrogen, perhaps converting that hydrogen into methane, but also continuing to use renewable energies through direct combustion, either of renewable gas, which is fed into the network, or using the heat from biomass or other dead heat. That is the vision about integrating and diversifying renewable energies through different networks and properly interconnecting those networks, which can be resolved technically and can be optimized in economic terms as long as the right regulations for the market are in place. And that is an important point too.
Sagt Ihnen diese Vision zu von Herrn Marignac?
Absolut. Also es wird immer gehen um eine Kombination aus technisch möglichst effizienten Mitteln, um CO2 zu vermeiden, in Kombination mit einem möglichst geringen finanziellen Aufwand. Denn eins darf man nicht vergessen, Energiekosten, und bei der Wärme ist es ganz unmittelbar so, spielen auch sozial eine große Rolle. Wir sind als Gesellschaft aufgerufen, die Klimawende zu schaffen, aber wir müssen überlegen, wie wir es möglichst schnell, aber auch möglichst günstig hinbekommen. Und da in der Tat spielen bestehende Infrastrukturen eine große Rolle. Wir glauben auch, dass zentrale Infrastrukturen hier natürlich eine nochmal herausgehobene Rolle spielen. Das hat
of utmost importance in this. On the one hand, it is easier to implement modern technologies in central infrastructures. People often say that decentralized systems are better, but this is not true. We can be more efficient with resources in centralized structures. And on the other hand, I would like to stress that centralized systems are more efficient, and this is also important in terms of politics. That is why we have not seen many changes here over the last years. We should make use of the potential we have. Another question to both of you. What role do buildings play in the energy system? For example, smart buildings. Mr. Marignac.
Buildings, of course, are a major factor in the energy transition. To start with, we have to start building smarter buildings, passive buildings, as much as possible. There are lots of technical solutions available there. But above all, and we know that all countries have problems with this one today, we need to deal with the existing building stock. Because, of course, a lot of our buildings, well, most of them have already been built. So digital processes, smart systems, active systems allow us these days to partly reduce energy consumption in the buildings, but there's a very limited potential with the historical housing stock. When at the time they were built, energy performance was pretty poor. And apart from those active systems, in Europe, in Germany, in France, a lot of other countries in Europe, we're not going to get by without renewing the existing housing stock to a great extent. And of course, technically and financially, there's a big job to be done there in engaging the funding and pursuing that work. Of course, you get a payback because you're using energy more economically, but a role has to be played now in financing the energy transition this way, just as the European Commission has defined.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Marignac.
Well, thank you very much, Monsieur Marignac. As regards the building and the sort of internal structure, obviously Berlin is quite a different city from Paris. As regards smart grids, has one thought about this at all? Well, it is correct that what we're building today, the sort of building structure that we invest in today, needs to be one that is in line with with a fossil-free future. In about 20 years' time, we will have a fossil-free future, but it has to last for about 100 years. I mean, that's basically what is true for most of our industrial plants these days. When you build a blast furnace these days, it will have a life of 40 years. So until 2060, it will have to be able to produce steel in a fossil-free environment. So that's a genuine problem. But the renewal rates for real estate in cities, that's between 0.5 and 2%. So the objective is not to build as many smart buildings as possible, but our objective needs to be that to look at CO2 reduction mitigation possibilities in what the buildings that we already have. And that means we have to work for energy efficiency, for saving energy. But speed, obviously, right now is of the essence in this overall energy transition. So how do we actually produce heat? How do we actually produce electricity in a non-perfect environment? That is what we need to do right now. That would be a much more efficient policy. And there we have to reduce CO2 emission, and that's much more affordable at any rate. Well, very clear-cut words at the end. So thank you very much, Mr. Friedrichs, and thank you, Monsieur Marignac of Negawatt. Electricity comes from a socket in the wall. That's what I try to tell my French friends, but it also comes from batteries. And here our next speaker, Jean-Baptiste Pernaut, can tell us quite a lot. Jean-Baptiste Pernaut is CEO, Chief Operational Officer with Automotive Cells Company, a joint venture of PSA and Total, and I believe also Opel is in on this. So a European battery player, and I think Monsieur Pernaut is already with us, at least virtually. So I hope that he's going to bring us up to speed about where we stand with the European Battery Alliance and environmentally friendly manufacturing alliance. You have the floor, sir.
Herr Pernaut, hören Sie mich? Ich kann Sie sehr gut sehen, aber der Ton hat uns in den letzten Minuten...
Can you hear us, Monsieur Pernaut? I can see you very well, but...
Ah, voilà, super.
Je vous entends bien.
I can hear you very well.
Dann
Je
nochmal.
vous entends.
Also
I can
die
hear you.
Europäische Batteriefertigungsallianz interessiert uns und ist die...
We'd like to hear about your production alliance. Perhaps it's there in order to encourage green reindustrialization of Europe. Would you like to tell us about that?
Allô?
Hallo?
Voilà. Merci.
Okay.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Tout d'abord, je veux saluer.
First of all, I'd like to say hello to everyone who's
On est dans un contexte
logged in this afternoon in this very specific situation we find ourselves in.
type de forum en face à face.
It would be much nicer to have this kind of forum face to face, but I think at least we can communicate in the forum about our progress. And this afternoon I'd like to talk to you about the status of our project, ACC, Automotive Cells Company, which evolved out of a desire to set up a European champion in batteries. I don't want to spend too much time recalling the context of this, the background to the growth of the vehicle or e-mobility market in Europe, but I would like to highlight one major point. For now, electric vehicles are not affordable in terms of price for most of the population. And one of our major objectives in Europe, I think, is to establish technical, industrial and economic conditions that will make these electric vehicles affordable in financial terms for most people.
Ceci, effectivement,
And this, of course,
en restant respectueux de l'environnement,
while respecting the environment.
un point majeur,
And another recent major point, which is minimizing the carbon footprint of those batteries.
pour l'instant, en tous les cas, quelque chose qui n'est
For
pas,
now, this is something
n'existe pas. La
that
mesure
hasn't happened yet.
standard,
The standard measure for this carbon footprint
objectif, bien entendu, majeur
is, of course, a
de toute l'industrie,
major objective that the whole industry is watching, and we're trying to make some progress on that through ACC. Perhaps we can move on to the next slide.
de cette société.
So one ambition we have
Européen leader, donc
to be a European leader,
en Europe, mais nous adresserons aussi le
but we're also addressing the world market here
module et des cellules de batterie automobile,
with automotive battery cells and modules,
avoir une mobilité propre, efficace,
enabling clean, efficient mobility for all, affordable for everyone, as I was saying.
et
Can we move on?
voilà. Donc quatre
We have,
cette ambition, il y a
we
quatre
can break this down, this ambition, into 4 commitments. We want to be competitive. On that point, I'd like to highlight something important, which is that for the time being, most suppliers of car batteries are, a lot of them are coming from Korea and China,
la conviction que l'on peut être
and
compétitif depuis l'Europe et nous sommes
we believe that Europe can be competitive. We're trying to prove it,
je dirais des Chinois en Chine, par exemple.
including in China.
Nous ne sommes pas dans une industrie
So
de main-d'œuvre, mais plutôt dans une industrie de
we're not looking just at a cheap labor economy here. We need high skills. And we believe that we can develop economies of scale.
cette échelle avec cette taille
If we take the scale and that minimum size that we need in order to be effective in the European market, with the batteries that we are currently developing,
automatisée et
using very highly automated production lines, best in class, we're capable of producing at the same cost, even cheaper than some of the players in China. That's the first point to make. Best-in-class technologies, I'll come back to that a bit later with our roadmap. At the moment, we're working on developing a 4th generation of battery. The first
mais aussi
stage will be to begin production in 2023,
tout solide
but we're looking at
qui sont,
solid batteries.
d'entre vous le savent déjà,
Some of you will be aware of this already.
une avancée importante
That will be a major step forward in terms of performance and safety, but also competitiveness.
Troisièmement, des batteries qui doivent être
Thirdly, these batteries would be developed and manufactured in Europe,
achetées aussi
and I'll be coming back to that, and also buying in from Europe because we need components. And fourthly,
durables,
these would be long-lasting batteries,
sociales et environnementales,
sustainable both socially and environmentally,
d'objectifs spécifiques
which also relates to some specific targets in terms of the supply chain
pour fabriquer ces batteries.
in order to be able to manufacture those batteries. Next slide, please.
S'il vous plaît. Donc les actionnaires
Our shareholders at ACC,
SAP,
we have Saft,
une très ancienne entreprise de batterie
a very old battery making company,
non asiatique actuellement
not
en opération
based in
en Europe
Asia,
et même
working in Europe and the United States.
Total.
It's a subsidiary of the Total Group.
De l'autre, PSA,
Then there's PSA,
Peugeot, Citroën, DS, Opel.
Peugeot, Citroën, DS,
Deux étant
Opel.
actionnaires à 50%,
They hold a
tient
50% stake, and Opel,
la société ACC. Comme vous savez aussi, il y a
also a major shareholder in the ACC.
pas de détails, mais des annonces
I'm not going to go into the details, but you'll have perhaps read
du groupe Renault
possible involvement of
aussi
Hondo and others, and there's been some talks between PSA and FCA. And if that goes ahead, that would open up some important prospects for ACC. But just an important comment here. We won't only be selling our products to our shareholders, even if they are major key clients for ACC, but any vehicle maker will be interested, probably, and we're looking at ways to sell outside the alliance, outside PSA. Next slide. I hope you can see this because it's a very pale blue. We have 4 sites for ACC. 2 are already being built, and they're in France, in Bordeaux. We have a testing plant, a pilot plant, near Bordeaux as well, should be operational next year, and 2 gigafactories in the north, the first one, and then a second 2 years later in Germany, with an overall capacity of 48 to 64 gigawatt hours altogether. Bearing in mind that the German site will actually start next year on research and development activities and preparing the industrial basis for the future gigafactory. So our objective will be to ensure that 50% plus of our subcomponents are produced in Europe, which means that we're working with European players and in some cases non-European players, but with sites in Europe. Our R&D structure is very sophisticated. We are working with universities and other industrial complexes through our shareholders, and also what Saft has been doing in research and development. The ramp up, this is a very intense program. The idea is to move on from R&D to the first factory and to complete the development of the next generation of product at the end of 2023, to move into mass production at that point. And at the moment we're looking at investing in 8 gigawatt hours by 2024, but that could vary depending on other conditions, demand, for example, and technologies. You can see some of the architects' models and photographs at the bottom. This is the construction work. Our testing center on the right at Deniersac near Angoulême. Next slide. I talked to you a bit about the importance of being eco-social friendly. There are 4 pillars, we think, here, which are mutually supportive. One is the low carbon footprint. Then we're working on the supply chain. We're working on recycling, and we're working on green factories. Next slide. What's essential is that we're not just trying to announce big objectives, coming up with slogans. We need some indicators that we can control, monitor, towards objectives that can be measured and verified in every respect, so that ACC becomes a leader in green batteries. That means, for example, a certain number of kilograms CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. We're working on doing better than the figure you can see here, but certainly it's something that we can measure and compare. On the supply chain, we know what the potential risks are in being linked to certain mining activities. There are social risks. I won't go into the detail about that, but we certainly hope to set targets here that can be both ambitious, reasonable, and measurable, and rule out certain sources of minerals that we don't think are acceptable. That's important for us. We think it's also important for the industry and for our clients, and even the clients of our clients. Recycling is probably in the long term potential, offers considerable development potential. We all know that the volume of batteries that can be recycled, that recycling capacity is not going to be available just yet. So we need to set this up stage by stage so that we can properly recycle the batteries that we bring into the market in the next few years. And on green factories, we're talking about using renewables. That requires a lot of technology to optimize energy consumption, and also to be sure that the green footprint of these factories is the best we can get. Next one, please. Looking at our technological roadmap, I'm not going to try here to go into details because there are some very specific questions here, but here you can see the 4 generations. There's a generation which we call Generation 3, which will be produced from the end of 2023, which will basically relate to the same standards as our big Asian rivals, with an energy density at maximum level and cobalt levels, very low cobalt levels, so that we can produce a battery that is competitive in terms of euros per kilowatt hour. That generation will be fairly quickly followed by a number of improvements in terms of the process, performance and electrochemistry, and then 2 generations of solid-state battery. The ultimate generation, I'm sure it's not going to be ultimate in the history of batteries. I'm sure there'll be other generations in the future, but the last generation that we're working on is a solid-state battery with a lithium anode that will enable us to considerably increase the energy density and, of course, to benefit from the advantages of an intrinsically safe battery because of the solid-state electrolysis. Next slide. Well, I wanted to finish this very brief introduction. I would, of course, be very happy to answer any questions, especially with regard to how this initiative might contribute to a European future for batteries. We'd like to be part of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Pernot. I actually should have told you that what we usually do is we have two speakers that we hear, one after the other. So first, Monsieur Pernot, and now our second speaker. We now go to Poland as part of the Weimar Triangle, and we look at the state of renewables in our neighboring country. We have been able to enlist the support here of Mr. Wisniewski, who is the president of the Institute for Renewable Energy. He is one of the co-authors of the Polish strategy for renewables. He was advisor to the Polish Minister of the Environment, and in 2016 he was called upon to serve in the advisory council of the Polish President of the Energy Transition. I hope, sir, you can hear us. You will tell us a little bit about wind and PV projects in Poland and bring us up to the current state of affairs on potentials for transnational cooperation and the emergence of new markets in the Weimar Triangle. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for a nice introduction, for inviting me for Franco-German Energy Forum as the representative of the Polish industry and research society. I would like to propose some ideas for cooperation in area of wind and photovoltaics, because I do believe that both technologies create a good base, good foundations for cooperation between Poland, France, and Germany within the Weimar Triangle. Please, next slide, please. We can skip this, please the next. Okay, thank you very much. So I believe that the national and energy actions plan are the good background for discussion about cooperation. And you can see the Polish national plan up to 2030 expressed in terms of the gigawatt capacity installed. So we submitted this plan in December to the European Commission. As you can see, we would like to push forward very much photovoltaics, offshore wind. We would like to keep onshore as well, and we are trying to reduce the capacity of the coal, both hard and lignite coal. But this is not a rapid change, as you see. May I please the next slide? And of course, the national action plans were prepared for all our countries, and we see that for 2020 we have the targets for Poland 15, for France 23, for Germany 18. But in 2017, the Commission checked the progress, the fulfillment of the targets for 2020. And as you can see, we were just in the middle of the road between 2010 and 2020. So I would imagine that despite the huge effort was done for today, the progress is not so, let's say, fast, not fast enough to achieve all the targets for 2020. But from the business point of view, the key is the targets for 2030. And in this case, the governments proposed 21% for Poland, 32% for France, 30% for Germany. And the Commission, during the assessment, advised the Polish side that we should increase the ambitions in terms of the renewable energy from 21% to at least 25%. So I think this is the big challenge, especially for Poland. And in this case, what is important, first of all, it means a massive investment. So we should discuss about money. But also there is the question about the phasing out of coal. May I ask for the next slide, please? And in principle, that's we estimated that in terms of the renewable energy electricity, we should invest at least 30 billion euro over the coming decade, and especially for wind, solar, and the rest of the renewables. What is positive, 1 month ago, we get the agreement in between the Polish government and the trade unions in coal industry that the coal phase out is possible by 2049. So it seems that we have a room, we have the perspective for the faster development of renewable energy. So far, we noticed that the bioenergy, hydro, and the geothermal are not progressing so fast. The wind potential is very high, and in this case, I think we still could develop projects onshore and offshore. And we are observing since 2 years a very fast development of photovoltaics. We have a huge potential, and what is important, the renewables, especially photovoltaics, but also wind, has got a good attention and very high support from the Polish society. So I think we are ready to start, not only for the 2020, but also for 2030 targets. What we need, especially as the money is already available from the EU programs, and also, of course, the market also could finance good renewable energy projects. We need renewable energy projects matured enough to progress very fast. Please, next slide. So for today, the renewable energy share in Poland in electricity, this is about 15%. However, 82% of that is contributed from wind and photovoltaics. So the wind is the key technology, but the photovoltaics is adding more and more ingredients in the period during the month and the hours where we need green capacity. For today, the solar and wind, zero emission but variable renewable energy resources, provides about 11% of the electricity consumption. So it seems, comparing even to Germany, 40%, that still we have a room for fast development of wind and solar. May I have next slide, please? Thank you. So as you can see, the investment, it was a very fast progress in between 2014 and 2016 because of fast investment, huge investment into wind onshore. After that, we were changing our support system, and it was a lot of discussion. So nothing serious happened in between 2016 2018, and so since 2018 photovoltaics is booming. Really, we are telling this just a solar boom in Poland. May I have the next slide? And as you can see on the European map, up till 2017, it was difficult to notice the Polish investment in photovoltaics. But since 2018 and 19, you can see this yellow bar. So last year we were at the 5th European market for photovoltaics. This year we are planning to be at least the 5th or even 4th market in Europe. So really, this is the confirmation that something important in photovoltaics happened in Poland. What was the reason? Please, next slide. Thank you very much. So as you can see, there are two color of bars important. the upper yellow, it means the prosumers. So Polish photovoltaics is based on the prosumers, and the Polish citizens really would like to invest in photovoltaics. Very soon, about 300,000 households will be equipped by the end of this year in photovoltaics. But
So, jetzt haben wir gerade gehört.
Well, unfortunately, we've lost Paul. Oh, now I hear you again, Mr. Michalski. We lost you for a short time.
Okay, wunderbar. Dann
Very good. So you're back.
Sie können gerne weiter.
So for today, in Poland, there are two engines for photovoltaics, prosumers. This is very good engine, and also photovoltaics, wind photovoltaics farms. So what we need for the future, we need projects and equipment. So regarding to projects, next slide, please. I would only briefly mention that the Polish developers are very active. For today, they are more than 4,000 projects, and this year perhaps we will get about 2 gigawatts of the grid connections permits for the new projects. So this is, I think, good preconditions for the future investment. Next slide, please. Regarding having this rush in the development and big interest of Polish prosumers in photovoltaics, we updated the national forecast for photovoltaics. So we believe that we will increase the installed capacity about 1 to 2 gigawatts every year. So we will achieve about 13 gigawatts in 2030. And what means that in 2024 we will exceed the power assumed in the national climate and energy action plan prepared in December last year. So this is just the confirmation how the big development of photovoltaics we observe in Poland. Next slide, please. So investing and this year even close to the 2 gigawatts of new PV projects, we developed all the supply chain. We started from the bottom part of this slide, I mean from installers, but we are moving to the producers. So to make the supply chain closer. So we have 6 manufacturers of the PV modules, and this year they decided to develop a PV cells factory in Poland, a gigafactory very similar to the project presented by Jean-Baptiste in terms of the batteries. And we believe that this factory will be ready to start the production at the beginning of the 2024. To supply the PV cells to the Polish and the European manufacturers. Next slide, please. Regarding wind, it was very fast development of wind at the beginning of this decade. So we have 6 gigawatts of wind installed. We are going to install 3-4 gigawatts up to 2022. But what's happened, the pace of the development of the new project is slower and slower. Next slide, please. So what is the reason that we were not able to fully use the wind potential? The wind potential for 2020-2030 is about 22 gigawatts. And it depends on the regulation, on the minimum distance from the household areas to the wind turbines. And the average in Europe, this is about 750 meters. For France, this is 500. In Germany, this is federal country. As the average is 550 meters. for Poland, there is at least 1,250 meters. So this is a very restrictive regulations. So to use this wind potential, to reduce the cost of the electricity, to reduce the emission of the CO2, we are working on new regulations to improve the current framework, and currently government is discussing new regulations in this case. So the wind energy onshore is still very important, not only offshore wind. So the last slide, please. On the base of these ideas, I would like to propose several areas for cooperation. First of all, I think Poland, Europe, Germany, and France need manufacturing of PV modules, and especially PV cells. This is the same case as the battery. The project is progressing now. The Polish industry joins forces to build a factory of PV cells, and even the cooperation, the consultations with German and the French institutes already started. The second idea, this is the joint activity in the renewable energy development in post-co-region in transitions. So according to the Polish strategies, all of the regions, both in Silesia, where we have the hardcore, and in Bełchatów, Turów, where we have the lignite, the renewable energy is the priority as the priority part of the strategy. In Silesia, there are many projects for the manufacturing of equipment. In the lignite side, because of the very good infrastructure, there are a number of projects for large wind and photovoltaic farms. The third idea, it is a little bit related from the beginning of our session, the district heating. In Poland, we have more than 50 gigawatts of capacity in district heating systems. They are mostly based on coal. And this is a very huge opportunity to store the surplus and balanced power from wind and also from photovoltaics. So this is, I think, the perfect opportunity for sectors coupling. And this is 1,000 cheaper than just the storage in electric batteries. As we are developing wind offshore, but also we will increase the capacity of wind onshore and photovoltaics, I think there is a proper time to develop wind and photovoltaics projects to be installed after 2025 on the base on electrolyzers and green hydrogen. So I think this is a huge opportunity for Poland and Germany to work also as a part of the innovation. What we observe in Poland, many manufacturers of renewable energy equipment are already established contacts and cooperation with the German and the French industry. I think that we are able to prepare a good offer for the EU and for export. Very important is the joint understanding of the importance of the local content and proper regulations for that. And at the end, I think in these areas of technologies, what is important, first of all, research projects, innovative projects, big infrastructure projects, for example, projects of common interest in terms of photovoltaics and wind. And I think it is the way to smooth achievement of the 2030 targets in all our countries. So this is my recommendation and my wish. Thank you very much for your attention.
Und wir danken Ihnen, Herr Wiśniewski. Jetzt kommen wir.
And we thank you, Mr. Wiśniewski. A brief round of questions and answers. Mr. Wiśniewski, maybe you would like to start, because you just said that you intend to build your own battery factory, your own cell factory. Is there a possibility that you, for example, join this battery alliance, this European battery alliance?
we have in Poland the manufacturers of PV batteries. There are Korean and German companies, and we have some good ideas for the innovative technologies in Polish laboratories. So, as I know, the Gigafactory is open for partners, and of course, we have also very ambitious program in electromobility. So we need batteries. We can offer the market, and also we can join our efforts, because this is very complementary technology to wind and photovoltaics. So this is one of the area of cooperation I didn't mention, but I think this is very important and attractive.
Herr Pernot, das ist doch ein Angebot, das Sie nicht ablehnen können.
Mr. Pernot, an offer you can't refuse, presumably.
Oui, nous travaillons déjà.
We're already working in the framework of an alliance.
Un groupement de projets.
There is a group of projects, an EPCE, that is a project of common European interest, which was set up and submitted and approved by the European Commission at the end of last year, 2019. That brings together 7 countries, including France, Germany and Poland, and 17 companies. ACC is part of it. So if you like, it's the battery sector being represented there with these 17 projects. There are manufacturing projects for battery cells like ours. There are some projects that are more about raw materials, research and recycling. So we're working within the framework of that alliance. For the time being, we are completely open to any cooperation if it makes sense to all the partners concerned. The European structure through this project of common interest does already exist, and it is very robust.
Could you envisage to perhaps broaden that to include partners beyond Europe, for example, Korean partners or Chinese partners? That question goes to both of you.
Je peux commencer à répondre
if I can start.
Bien sûr, en fait,
on the European framework. Could you hear me?
Allez-y.
Jetzt haben Sie beide angefangen.
No, you both started. I should have been more precise. Perhaps you would like to start, Monsieur Pernot, and then later on, Mr. Vattenfall. I'm sorry, I made a mistake there.
Donc, oui, parfaitement.
Yes, absolutely. We're already cooperating with non-European companies in Asia. We have Koreans, Japanese, Chinese, and a number of American companies too. So at ACC, through our shareholders like SAFT, we've been working on new generation, new technologies. So we're not closed-minded about this. It's already a fact. We think that the technical, economic challenge around batteries is major enough to require the pooling of quite a lot of activity.
Herr Wiśniewski, jetzt hören wir ganz gespannt, was Sie uns...
Mr. Wiśniewski, now we're listening to you.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not able to listen everything. So in the case of photovoltaics, because I mentioned it about this gigafactory for photovoltaics, We are considering cooperation, technological cooperation with Korea, for example, but we are keeping in mind as one of the instruments of the European Union the carbon border tax, the carbon adjustment mechanism. So especially that's we are open for cooperation, but we would like to have the production facilities in Europe. This is, I think, the first preconditions. And I think that for us the priority is the EU cooperation, because they are frameworks, they are research programs, very active. And as the second step, we are also looking for the technological development in Korea, in United States, and in Japan. But I think that we should use the existing framework and the existing facilities. And I think the framework of the important project of common interest is something just to be used for the starting point. And of course, we should be also open for the companies from outside of the EU as the partner and as the competitors, because this is, I think, business which is very, very competitive all over the world.
Vielen Dank. Das war der Direktor des Polnischen Instituts für erneuerbare Energien.
Thank you very much. That's the director of the Polish Institute for Renewable Energy, Gregor Wiśniewski, and thank you also to Monsieur Jean-Baptiste Pernaut, Chief Operational Officer of ACC. Now, a lot of input, so perhaps we ought to break for a short virtual coffee break until we meet again at 4 o'clock sharp for our last and very interesting meeting on climate-friendly investments. This is all about money, so it's going to be very interesting. And then there's going to be a keynote address as well by Professor Claudia Kempfert. So please now take a break and then come back at 4 o'clock sharp. Thank you.